In the days when the world was quieter and men took their time with the seasons, there lay a little village at the foot of the Catskill Mountains. The air there carried the scent of pine and earth, and the river sang its slow and steady tune, as though time itself had learned to rest in that place. The people who lived there were simple folk farmers, craftsmen, and wanderers who loved stories as much as they loved cider. They worked the land, raised their children, and gathered each evening at the inn to trade tales of storms, crops, and ghosts of the old Dutch settlers. Among them was a man named Rip Van Winkle, known across the valley not for his wealth or strength, but for his kind heart and lazy ways. Rip was tall and gentle, with eyes that smiled before his lips did. He loved children and animals more than chores, and he would rather fix a neighbor's fence than his own. The children adored him. They followed him through the meadows, laughing as he carved them wooden toys, taught them how to shoot pebbles with slings, or told them tales of spirits in the mountains. But at home, things were less peaceful. Rip's wife, Dame Van Winkle, was a sharp-tongued woman of great energy and little patience. She believed that work was the measure of a man, and in her eyes, Rip measured small indeed. She scolded him daily about the unweeded garden, the broken roof, the idle hours spent with the village men at the tavern. "Rip Van Winkle," she would cry, hands on her hips, "you'll wear out your breeches sitting in that chair while the world passes by. The hens have more sense than you." Rip only sighed, smiled gently, and wandered outside, seeking peace among the hills. His dog, Wolf, followed close behind, tail wagging. Together they roamed the woods until the sun dipped low, painting the mountains in fire and gold. He found comfort there, far from Dame Van Winkle's tongue and the noise of the village. The forest did not scold him. The trees whispered kindly, the brook hummed in understanding, and the wind carried secrets only dreamers could hear. One autumn afternoon, after yet another storm of words at home, Rip took up his gun and called to Wolf. "Come along, old friend," he said. "There's more peace among the pines than under that roof." They wandered higher than usual, past the fields and up into the cool shadow of the Catskills. The forest thickened around them, leaves rustled softly like old voices. The air smelled of moss and ancient stone. Rip rested by a brook, gazing at the clouds that floated like slow ships above the peaks. "If only life were as quiet as this," he murmured. Wolf barked once, as if to agree. As twilight deepened, Rip heard a strange sound, a distant rumble, like thunder rolling through the mountains. But the sky was clear. The noise came again, closer now. A deep thudding, rhythmic and heavy, like the beating of giant drums. From behind the trees emerged a short, stout man dressed in old-fashioned Dutch clothes. He carried a keg on his shoulder and beckoned silently for Rip to follow. Curiosity stronger than fear moved Rip's feet. He followed the man along a narrow path that twisted through rocks and roots until they reached a hollow where the moonlight shone upon a circle of figures playing ninepins. They were unlike any men Rip had ever seen. Their beards were long and grey, their faces solemn, and their eyes glimmered like the reflections of stars in deep water. They wore clothes from another age, broad hats, doublets, and buckled shoes, and they spoke no word as they rolled their heavy wooden balls down the lane. Each strike echoed like thunder across the hills. Rip, still unsure whether to fear or marvel, helped the first man pour from the keg into mugs of foaming liquor. The air filled with the scent of ale and the laughter of unseen spirits. When the men gestured for him to drink, he did so gladly. The liquor burned warmly through his veins, sweeter than anything brewed in the valley. The air shimmered, the stars seemed to dance. Again he drank, and again. The thunder of the ninepins grew softer, distant, like waves fading from shore. His head grew heavy, his eyelids fell. Wolf's faint whine echoed in the dark as Rip drifted into a sleep deeper than any dream. There are sleeps that last a night, and others that last a lifetime. Rip's was somewhere between. The forest grew around him as he slept. Seasons turned like pages in a forgotten book. Leaves fell. Snow covered the earth. Rivers froze and thawed. Trees rose taller than before. The world moved on, but Rip lay still beneath the moss and mountain mist. When at last he stirred, He heard birds song and felt the sun upon his face. His beard had grown long down past his chest, and his joints creaked as though they had aged 100 years. "Wolf?" he called weakly. No bark answered, only the rustle of the leaves. He looked around. The hollow was empty, the path half hidden by roots and vines. His gun lay rusted beside him. Had it all been a dream? Rip stumbled down the mountain, bewildered. The air felt different, sharper. The trees seemed older, the streams narrower. When he reached the valley, he found himself on a road that felt both familiar and strange. The village looked changed. New houses stood where old ones had been, fences replaced, roofs mended. The people, too, looked different, dressed in fashions he did not know. Children stared as he passed, whispering about the old man with the silver beard and tattered clothes. He reached the inn where he used to sit and gossip, but even that had changed. The sign above the door, which once bore the image of King George, now showed General Washington. Inside, men spoke eagerly of elections, Congress, and liberty. Rip, confused, asked timidly, "Does anyone here know Rip Van Winkle?" At the sound of the name, the room fell silent. Then someone laughed. "Why, old Rip Van Winkle? He's been missing these 20 years. Went up into the mountains one day and never came back." 20 years, Rip murmured, hand trembling. A grey-haired woman pushed through the crowd. "Rip Van Winkle!" she gasped. "Is it truly you?" It was his daughter, now grown, with children of her own. She told him that Dame Van Winkle had passed some years before, her tongue never tired, even to the end. Rip sat down slowly, letting the truth wash over him. He had slept through a revolution. The colonies were now the United States of America. The king was gone, and so was the world he'd known. Rip took up his place again in the village, though not as the man he had been. He lived with his daughter, spending his days telling stories of the men of the mountain and the days before the revolution. Some believed him, others laughed. The children, as always, gathered around him by the hearth, eyes wide as he spoke of thunderous ninepins and the strange ale that could steal 20 years of one's life. Rip smiled often now. Without Dame Van Winkle's scolding and with nothing left to lose, he was finally free to do what he'd always done best, nothing at all, except tell stories and watch the mountains fade into gold each evening. When travelers came through the valley, they would sometimes find him sitting beneath a great oak, looking up at the Catskills, a faint smile beneath his white beard. And if the wind blew just right, one might hear the faint echo of rolling thunder from deep within the hills, the sound of the ninepin still tumbling in some hidden hollow, and perhaps a gentle chuckle from the spirit of Rip Van Winkle himself. The story of Rip Van Winkle is told across America not just as a tale of enchantment, but as a whisper of truth about the passing of time. It reminds us that while the world changes swiftly, governments rise, nations are born, human hearts often sleep too long, dreaming of a past that will not return. But perhaps, like Rip, we all wake one day to find that the world has changed around us, and that peace lies not in holding on to the old, but in learning to rest within the new.